to be here. I really feel that I am PRISM, and I've been lucky enough, kind of through my career, to kind of break through some of the sort of career ceilings that I think we see. But I am like you, I'm essentially on fixed term and working to manage just a very big collaboration and a big partnership. So it's really good to be here and to kind of joined by some fantastic panellists who I think in a minute I'll have to introduce themselves and their roles, and then we'll reflect on kind of journeys that people have taken to get here. We were due to be joined by Beck Riley as well, but I think as we're running a bit behind, it's probably helpful that there's only a smaller group of us to talk through things. So we have Jason, yep, Susie and Parisa, who are all going to really graciously share with us some insights from their careers and lessons that they've learned. So maybe if I start with you, Parisa, if you could just kind of briefly say a little bit about your current role and how you got into it.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So my name is PRISM, and so yeah, I look very different to the picture you saw. Very short hair. So I work in a mental health research charity called MQ. Because many people know Cancer Research UK, we usually say that it is like the equivalent of Cancer Research UK, but for mental health. It's an organization that was established by seed funding from Wellcome Trust around 11 years ago, but now we're independently raising funds and then invest that raised money into mostly developing early mid-career researchers in mental health, like funding fellowships, scholarships for postdocs, etc. And in my role, the job title is Research Program Lead, which is very informative. And I do a wide range of activities. Some of them will be shaping our funding calls, working with our Science Council, Board of Trustees, lived experience experts, which means like people who have either experience of having a mental illness or have been caring for somebody with a mental illness, and trying to decide on what to commission and the setting of a funding committee and running a funding round. But also we do a lot of convening, like bringing different stakeholders in the sector together to, for instance, decide on research priorities. One big piece of work we did was during the pandemic. Early on, we brought together a wide range of stakeholders, mostly senior academics, to decide on the priorities that we need to consider within the context of the pandemic, but around mental health research, which was published in the Lancet Psychiatry, which is like a prestigious journal. So it got a lot of citation, and it managed to lead into informing a lot of funding calls by big funders like UKRI and NIH. And the third piece of work we do is patient and public involvement, which is bringing the perspectives of lived experience experts, people with experience of mental illnesses, into design, delivery, and dissemination of research. And in my role, I support all these different activities.
Thank you. Susie, if you could say a little bit about your role.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm the co-director of a Centre for Doctoral Training based at the University of Bath. It's in Statistical Applied Mathematics, SAMBA is the name of the centre. So I started off working after my PhD, working for EPSRC, as many chemists end up doing, no job. And I loved it. I loved working in the research environment. I was very happy to stay there, enabling research to happen. I then moved back to the University of Bath and worked in the research office for a while. And whilst I was doing that, I kind of fell into managing our CDT response to the CDT call that the EPSRC had out. Partly, I think, just somebody put their hand up, and that happened to be me. And again, I just loved it. I loved being involved in the day-to-day idea of kind of the research development and the concept that you could nurture students into this environment. So when our CDTs were funded, I was lucky enough to secure a job working in the SAMBA team, at that point as a centre manager. And during the time I was working in SAMBA, I was able to kind of grow lots of different things that I did, and perhaps that will come up later in the discussion, but it really kind of gave me the platform to grow my own personal development, but also the centre as a whole. And so I was promoted to co-director back in 2019. And we've just secured, 2 years ago now, secured our third round of funding for that CDT, which is quite an achievement. It feels like, you know, it was a very personal achievement as well as a professional achievement. So yeah, now that's what I'm doing, amongst many other things. I've just had a career break, so maybe this would be something also for us to come back to in the discussion, because it's kind of interesting for me to have gone away feeling one way and I've come back feeling a different way, and so it would be yeah, this is week 2 back at work, so I'm still in a very positive way.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Jason Snow. I work here at Warwick. I've had a long and varied career since I graduated back in 2010 at Warwick. I think I've done a lot of the jobs that are going here. So I started way back as a tour guide on campus. I've done things like being a parking attendant. I was a cleaner. I stocked shelves. Then I became the assistant to the research degrees coordinator at Warwick Manufacturing Group. Then I became the assistant research degrees coordinator at Warwick Manufacturing Group. Then I became the research degrees coordinator at Warwick Manufacturing Group. Then I transferred over to Warwick Business School, where I was at WMG for about 9 years. Then transferred over to Warwick Business School, where I was a research support officer / project support officer for about 2 years. So working with a large NIHR funded project there with a couple of regional healthcare providers. And I transferred to Research and Impact Services just over a year ago, where I work in the research culture team with Rika and some of my colleagues who are in the audience. And my current job title is Interdisciplinary Research Program Administrator. I think I got that right. So I look after a couple of Warwick Spotlights, which are basically platforms designed to remove some of the barriers to doing interdisciplinary research here at Warwick and beyond. And yeah, really happy to be here and have a conversation, and great to hear everyone's thoughts today.
Thank you. I said at the beginning that I consider myself PRISM. It wasn't a conscious decision. I think my first PRISM job was I wanted to move back north to be closer to who has become my husband, and it was a PRISM job where it was provided that opportunity to move from Cambridge back up to Yorkshire. And I've since stayed managing larger and larger collaborations. Do you regard yourselves as PRISMs? I don't know, Jason, maybe start with you. And was it a conscious kind of career decision to get to where you are now?
I was really hoping you wouldn't pick me first. Maybe this will be a provocation. So I don't consider myself a PRISM, but my colleagues do consider me a PRISM. So I navigate this 1 foot in, 1 foot out of the PRISM world. And there are a few reasons, and I really thought about this quite a lot. So it might help if I give a bit of context. So I am from working class family, first generation to go to uni, single income household, yada, yada, yada. I'm also autistic. So that frames a lot of the way I conceive, identify as things or whatever. But going back to the stats we saw on the PRISM stats slide earlier, I think I don't see a lot of people like me in the PRISM world. I don't really have to go into a lot more detail than that, but that's one reason why it doesn't resonate with me so much as a label, perhaps. But I also think another factor is when I think of a PRISM, I think of a level of responsibility or seniority that I don't have in my role. So the first time I was told that I was working in professional services was after I'd been at university for 10 years already. And I was like, at what point did my job go from being you're not in professional services to now you're in professional services or you're a professional services manager? For me, I don't think I have that level of responsibility over any of the things that I do on a daily basis. For me, I think if I were to tell other people that, oh, I'm a PRISM, and they say, okay, what's a PRISM? And I go through the acronym one by one, they would say, that doesn't sound a lot like the job description we hired. Even though I do a lot of the things that are in the PRISM kind of ballpark. So I find myself in this kind of uneasy position where it's a blessing in some ways. I can navigate, people accept me, but I also look around a little bit and think, I've always had this imposter syndrome that Marie mentioned as well, in a higher education research institution environment. And I don't know how much of that is me projecting and how much of that is me just looking around and not seeing a lot of similar faces or backgrounds to what I have.
That's really helpful. And I think it's interesting reflection about that kind of not realising kind of when you move from one
Right.
part of the institution to another. I think quite a lot of PRISM roles sort of straddle that kind of professional services and being in an academic group or department. And I kind of remember that from when I sort of first started at University of Sheffield in a kind of PRISM role. Susie, do you identify PRISM?
Yeah, so probably the opposite end from Jason in that I felt like I always thought this was my calling. I knew I wasn't going to be an academic researcher quite quickly during my PhD, but I also knew I loved that freedom, that sort of sense of exploration, that sense of doing stuff, and I wanted to be part of it. And I really moved to EPSRC thinking this is what I want to be a part of. I want to enable people to do this cool stuff that I'm probably not the best person to do. And I've actually, perhaps it's a bit naivety in fact, that I just sort of ploughed my way through. I think I also got a bit lucky in contacts I made, which is again something you don't necessarily realise how lucky you are until you reflect back on things. But through my time at EPSRC, I happened to end up knowing the Dean of Science at Bath pretty well. Then I started working at Bath. He had the office like just down the corridor to me. Like, you know, it's just one of these sort of random things that you fall into. And he really sort of smoothed my path through the uni. And so I ended up in this job that I totally loved, that I in Samba, that I felt I'd carved out for myself with colleagues who massively valued what I was bringing. I mean, it's a maths department, right? And I love the mathematicians, but they really value people skills, possibly, perhaps, they're much, I mean, it might be different in different maths departments. Ours is quite an outward focused maths department. They're lovely, lovely people, but they're very willing to admit that there's stuff that they don't want to do or don't have the skill set to do, and to welcome other people in, perhaps differently to other departments in our university. So I was super welcome. And then actually our Pro-VC at the time said to me, there's this lady who's just started working at the University of Exeter on a CDT. She's come from a very different background to you. She's come through a research program. She's just stopped being a researcher. She's now CDT manager. I feel like she needs a bit of support and mentorship. I started chatting to her. Totally different career experience. Well, not totally different, but, you know, somewhat different. We ended up doing the same role. We suddenly realised we were sharing all of these things. That person with Anya Roding, who many of you probably are aware of, who founded the PRISM network. So I feel like, yeah, I'm the other end of that spectrum in that Anya and I kind of defined ourselves and then found there were lots of other people like us. And we kind of, and I think my reflection on listening to what you were just saying is, you come in with this preconceived idea that everyone should be like me because I'm, you know, the person who decided that this was what PRISM was. But of course that's utter rubbish. And there's 1,000,001 different ways you can interpret a PRISM. And I think it's a really useful thing to now have this huge group of people doing totally different things, challenging what we're doing, challenging the status quo to make us rethink how we go forward. And that funding is going to really help that.
Yeah, so definitely I consider myself a PRISM, and definitely it wasn't a conscious choice to become a PRISM because I had no idea what this is. And initially I became, like, I was trained as a pharmacist, like, I don't know, 20 years ago, in my previous life. But the only reason that I moved to research is because I'm not from the UK and I was keen to change my career. I wasn't very happy being a pharmacist, and I was also keen to experience studying and living in a developed country. And the only way I could get a visa and get the money to do it was doing a PhD. So that's how I ended up doing a PhD in the University of Edinburgh. Otherwise, I would have been keen to do a Master of Public Health, but I couldn't find any funding for doing a master. So yeah, and that's probably not the interview. Yeah, so I did a PhD, which was supposed to be around public health, but just before starting my project, a paper was published very similar to what I was going to do in my PhD. So we had to quickly change the topic, and the topic became very much around health research and like governance of health research, research funding, allocation of like limited resources in low resource settings. So I ended up doing a PhD around research, and without being very interested in being an academic initially. And by the time I finished my PhD, I felt like the expertise and knowledge that I acquired during my research could be very useful for funding organizations. That's why when I finished my studies, I immediately looked for jobs in funding organizations. And because I was like historically been interested in mental health, I found the first job that I found was in the NIHR, National Institute for Health and Care Research, around setting up a UK-wide network of biomedical research centers who work in mental health. So I felt like this was the right fit for me. I applied for it and luckily I got the job. And this is how I started my career as a PRISM without knowing what it was.
I mean, all very different experiences and kind of paths into your roles. And that will be echoed around the room. What's something that's really surprised you about kind of these kind of roles, working in them? What's something that either current role or previous role that's kind of a sort of surprised or that you've kind of learned from this type of role? Maybe if I start with you, Susie.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I'm not sure there is anything that surprised me. I feel like part of the role of the PRISM is to just absorb everything and deal with it. And in a sense, that kind of defines what we're doing. So I was trying to think, I honestly thought about this loads. And so the most surprising thing is nothing has surprised me. I think possibly on a sort of more personal level, I've been surprised at how valued I've been by my team. Again, I kind of recognise that survey thing about, you know, the team values and the institution doesn't. Again, us a small institution and there's a lot of value of us there. But I think it's hard to push to sort of get that value out. And I guess the one thing that maybe surprised me the most, and I don't know if this would resonate with people, is that in fact it was much easier for me to get my role appreciated and supported by my academic colleagues than by my professional services colleagues who weren't necessarily PRISM, because I think people, so say, this is a really bad example, but say someone in the doctoral college who deals with our student input database all of the time will be horrified that I didn't know the inner workings of SAMIS. And I can't even log into SAMIS. I'm hopeless with that stuff because I don't need to do it for my job. That's not my job. But it's really hard to explain to someone who sits in a student-facing role in a doctoral college, which is very process-driven, that although I'm not an academic, my job doesn't involve process and data and spreadsheets in the same. It's really useful for me to know that information and to use that information, but it's not my job. But that was, I mean, that's not really not been a huge issue for me, but it's the most surprising thing I could think of when you asked the question.
Jason, what would you say?
Just to echo that, I also really struggled. I mean, these are my notes on surprises. I just drew a blank. I think, the main thing that surprised me, I guess, is that I do still get surprised when I really shouldn't. I've been here doing this for like 12 years and you think you've seen everything. And then I think you just let your guard down and something surprises you. I guess one thing is that you can never take things for granted. So we do a lot in terms of like process improvement, designing new processes, writing SOPs and things like that. I guess one thing that surprises me is that there'll always be someone who has a different perspective or different experience, and what you think will work for everyone doesn't work for them. So it's a good kind of exercise to never rest on your laurels, always think, are there different ways that I can convey this information? Because that's one thing I think where sometimes you'll be like, okay, I've really nailed and I've explained that really well. And someone will be like, what did you mean by that? And you go, yeah, back to the drawing board. So that's one of the great things about the job, I guess. But yeah, in terms of other surprises, I think, there weren't a lot that I could think of. Yeah.
So one surprising thing in the beginning for me was that I always liked like organizing things, connecting people together. And it was surprising to me to know that you can be paid for doing that. Actually, it was a very positive surprise. But on the less positive side, I was surprised to learn gradually how difficult it is to progress in this career. Because I always thought that an academic career is very complicated and very hard because of the competition. But at least there is a pathway for you. There is a ladder. But in here, I was really surprised to see how difficult it is. And the second one, as Susie was saying, it was surprising to see that my work was a lot more valued by the academics rather than by my PRISM colleagues. Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I was really surprised when I took my first PRISM role. I moved from the Royal Society of Chemistry, where I was working in publishing, and it was there was lots of systems and process and things. And I went to the University of Sheffield, and I discovered afterwards that the holders of the grant had been told by the EPSRC that they had to get a project manager because they were kind of failing. Basically, I arrived and they didn't know what to do with me. I didn't have a computer, I didn't have anything, and they thought I should be photocopying and kind of that complete kind of preconception of women I was in upbringing. And so that was a real, I suppose, kind of quite a shock to the system from having come from someone that was kind of very sort of organised and kind of used to dealing with people that were kind of doing all these sorts of kind of different admin and marketing and communications type roles. I think for me, kind of looking back, one of the things that I learned was to find a little tribe within where I'm working. So kind of I didn't fit. There wasn't a Christmas party that I was invited to because I wasn't a secretary, I wasn't a technician, and I wasn't an academic. So I picked the one that looked most fun and went back. Instead, I've always kind of made sure I had the misfits for the Christmas party. But so that was me my one sort of lesson for people moving into these roles is make sure you kind of find your peer network or the people that are going to help you when you don't quite fit. I don't know, Fuza, what would be your sort of recommendation to someone new into this?
Yeah, I have taken some notes and I need to find them. They are very easy to remember, but I just didn't manage to memorize them. So there are some very practical suggestions, but I guess a lot of people in this room are a lot more advanced than I am, so you may not find these beneficial. But one thing for me that I learned was to negotiate early about your job title and your salary. Because when I applied for my first job, they asked this interview question, which I think now it is banned, that what was your last salary? And because I was coming out of my PhD and I was so inexperienced about job interviews in the UK, I told them my stipend was 13K. And they're like, okay, so we should just offer her the basic from the range. So this is one advice I would give. And negotiate on the job title, because I think it can make a big difference externally and then help you with your further negotiations along the way. The other one is seeking development opportunities, maybe a bit similar to what you were saying around finding your tribe, find networks and reach out to them, try to be proactive. I have started to be proactive just now, which is very late in my career, but at least I have started. But yeah, this is something that I would recommend. For example, in terms of particularly diversity that we were discussing earlier. For example, I have found this great program funded by Wellcome, which is called Success on the Board, which is like a 1-year development plan that provides opportunities for development, coaching, one-to-one coaching sessions for people from underrepresented groups on boards, but this is specifically for PRISMs. And this is only something that I had to apply for. And I guess there's not a lot of competition, so just go for it and apply for them. And the third one is, again, along these lines, to try and find a mentor early on. Yeah, so I think these are things that I have learned in the hard way.
Yeah, so not too dissimilar, I guess. I think for me, when I started, I wanted to run after every opportunity, do as much as I possibly could. It meant I ended up doing everything, which was amazing. But, I was doing from the photocopying and the, website design, which I had no clue to do, to sort of traveling to these wonderful places and doing kind of high level discussions with people in Mexico about partnering. It felt like a huge range of stuff, plus dealing with every student problem that came through. And as our student cohort grew to kind of 70 or 80, a lot of students to talk to. And so this is kind of coming back to reflection post-career break. I'd got to the point, despite the wonderful job title that I'd managed to get myself, which I completely agree that this is something that, for me, certainly over and above the salary, the job title was really vital for me to get the recognition externally that I felt that I needed to explain what it was I was doing on the grant. Like I was making these strategic decisions and these vision discussions on the grant and stuff, and yet I was manager, and the academics who would be swanning off and, you know, spending 90% of their time doing research were co-directors, and there was literally no resistance when I went to them and said I'd like to take this co-director job. But still, I'm a co-director and I'm busy kind of dealing with these what felt like somewhat basic admin stuff, because I'd always done it. Not very good at letting go of stuff. I like to feel valued and well and important, and I'm making a difference to people. So I guess my two things are opposite, my two bits of advice. One is initially, when you're starting a job, to say yes to as much as you possibly can, because you don't know where these things are going to lead. It's one of the beauties of a PRISM role, that actually it can expand in so many different directions, and you don't know where those like bits of excitement or opportunities are going to come from. At the same time, something I need to learn better to do is to when to shut it down and when to say no to stuff and where to draw that boundary. And I think that's a really, for me anyway, a much, much harder thing to do. And I don't want to say to people, this is what I'm also reflecting on, I don't want to say, no, I don't have time to do that. What I need to say is, no, that is not my job to do that. And I think especially in an academic department, where, a bit like Helen said, you turn up as the token non-academic woman and they're like, brilliant, photocopying, tea making, whatever. Being able to say, no, that is not my job, feels like a terrible, I mean, I'm not sure I would do it even now. And still my colleagues, I've worked in that department for 10 years, still my colleagues say, oh, Susie's the CDT administrator. CDT's administrators are brilliant people and absolutely vital, but it's not my job title. And I find it a little bit frustrating. It's like me saying to a professor, oh, here's the postdoc. Nothing wrong with being a postdoc, but you're not. You've got up this career stage, you're a professor. So trying to call that out and saying to people, no, it's not my job, and this is how you should be respectful to me and my job title. This is what I'm going to try and do now I'm back. And the wonderful thing about having a career break is all of these rubbishy jobs, rubbishy, I shouldn't say that, for students. I love working with the students, but I'm so grateful not to have them coming into my office every day at the moment with various problems, because it sucks out the time to do the stuff that is my job. So I'm really looking forward to actually being able to deliver stuff at the level that I've been wanting to do for ages, and hopefully set us up for future success in what is a complicated and challenging time at the moment for the centre. So yeah, that sounded a bit more like a moan than a mint, but I think so.
Totally recognise something that I recognise. I also used to have like behaviours that didn't sort of cement the kind of title that went with it. So I used to have a meeting with all the vice chancellors from Women's Innovation, and I was going round and clear up all the teacups. And that's because they'd all just walk out of the room and I couldn't leave it. So now I walk out with them and then I sneak back in and I have to chat about the football or whatever it is. So I kind of cement the right behaviour and then hide the bad behaviour.
But with my colleagues, now I know them better, I would do it slightly differently, because it's people I work with a lot, and say, sorry, can you all help clear up this room? Because just because I'm a token woman does not mean that you professors can't be clearing up. And they, again, mathematicians are quite easy. Yeah, they're all great. So sorry.
No, yeah, all really great advice, and I've actually got a few things on here that have already been mentioned. Set boundaries, and really important. Find your tribe. I had that. The sooner you find them, the better support you'll have, and you can sense check with people, and they'll say, no, it's not you. It definitely is a real thing. You know. The main advice when I thought about, and I had a lot to say about this, so I just tried to keep it brief. The main one for me is the version of the serendipity prayer. For me, that is looking back, I would have told myself to pick my battles. to actually conserve my energy and put it in the right place, pick situations that I knew I could change and not burn myself out with things either inside or externally that I couldn't change. In terms of work situations, I've been in a lot of roles which have not been right for me, but I didn't realise that until too late. So I would go back. I even ended up one of the jobs. I wrote a little list of the reasons why I would stay doing this job one day, and the brief list is: am I learning skills I want to learn? Am I making progress towards a destination I want to get to? Am I making an impact? Am I enjoying it? And do I feel like I'm being fairly compensated for it? And I went through the list and I went, okay, none of the above. And that was the wake up call. It was time to go. So the other one I underlined here is whatever you do, just get on with it. Because if you're in positions where you're not enjoying it, the days can feel really long, but the years actually are really quick. So I got to a position 7, 8 years in, and I look back and I was like, why didn't I have this realization 5 years ago? But sometimes you have to just take that journey to get there. I also wrote that sometimes a good career move doesn't have to be a move traditionally up or forward. There are all sorts of reasons for trying to find a new role which offers one of the incentives that I mentioned that is the right solution at that time. And I've taken steps like that before and have been really happy and found out, okay, there are actually other teams that really appreciate me. But in terms of the appreciation, I would also say, in line with finding your tribe, is work out what you're good at and shout that really loudly. Show off and champion yourself, and if you do that, people will join in. You can't always wait for people to say you're really good at this, you need to find that, and people will follow you if you do it. Yeah, what else did I have? Just echoing the things that people said here. And there are lots of, I think we also said about getting involved in everything, right? And then you end up stretching yourself a bit too much. So I would just say yes to everything, but remember the boundaries thing as well. So don't say yes to anything. Say yes to the things that you think you want to do and you'll get something out of, and it will show value. And then eventually, if you believe in what you're doing enough, people will recognise it.
Thank you. That's a really nice place to end. I think, and I think, one of the great things is in sort of PRISM roles is you are like in teams that do really value you.
Yeah.
Whether, I really recognise that sort of tension with the kind of wider university, not necessarily thinking about the roles, but I think the fact that you can be with your mathematicians or whoever it is that you're managing and kind of really make an impact on the work and feel really valuable is one of the things that makes these roles really enjoyable to be in.
Yeah.
And also that point about continuing opportunities to learn. I find that I'm working on new projects and different things and continually growing, and that's probably why I said in my role, I think we've caught people back up on time as well. But I don't know if you want any questions from the audience.
Sure. So I just want to thank all our panelists and our chair for being so courageous and sharing. Anything else before we can probably take one question from the room and one question online. And I can see in the transcript it keeps calling PRISM. We'd like to make sure everyone you're not prisoners and after. We'll be having a break.
Just the one which was, and I might be being really naive here, but could you see a situation in which somebody could be named a CDT co-director, for example, who came purely from professional services background, rather than having that PhD and the kind of doctor?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yes, is the short answer. I think there is almost too much emphasis, and it's something we're working on quite closely at Bath, is to take out the requirement to have a doctorate to do this sort of role, because actually it's not about, it's definitely, for me, been super useful to have the knowledge of the research environment and the knowledge and understanding of how a PhD works. But a lot of my colleagues who do CDT manager roles don't have that and are absolutely knowledgeable as I was about it. They've just got that experience through a different route. So yeah, I would say it's not essential, but the experience is important, like being able to bring all of those different things together and just having the empathy maybe that you need to have with the students. It's easier to talk about it when you've done it, but
I think there's a bit of a general trajectory as well. So seeing the changes around technicians and technicians being able to be PIs on equipment grants and not necessarily having kind of a PhD and things there. We're seeing more things like red projects where the PI is not an academic. So Kelly Veer, for example, she became PI of that project, didn't have a PhD and things. So I think there's a bit of a shift happening more generally as well.
And definitely with EPSRC moving for PRISMs as co-aids for the last CBT course.
Yeah.
And for the research professional bit, we are 50-50 with PhDs, me and Isabella, and without PhDs, Lorna Wilson and Steph Bales. Great, so we've got time for one online question.
Yeah.
Great.
I just got a comment from Holly Rowland saying that she'd like to see some ways of summarising the nature of a PRISM role without defining it against other things, i.e. identifying what it is not, which I think is really interesting.
Great, so thank you